back for part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Rosemary Nyabadza. If you haven't seen part 1 already, please make sure you queue that up after this video. It gives us a great foundation for Rosemary's background behind her training towards becoming a doctor, and then also some of her, I think, life philosophies that are going to influence the conversation that we're going to have now. So many of you have asked me about how to cope with anxiety and what is anxiety, and is it something that you have to live with? Can you deal with it conclusively and move on? So I figured I might as well bring an expert about this and make sure that we exhaust all of our questions and come out of this a little bit wiser about how to identify and deal with anxiety. So Rosemary, let's pick up where we left off. And, you know, like I was saying in the earlier video, I can tell that you have a great passion around holistic healing. And oftentimes, you know, if I relate to this topic of anxiety, I know that it is the seeds of stress. But that's just my one interpretation of it. I think it would be great if we actually just set the foundation by hearing from you. What actually is anxiety? How does it show up in people's lives? And what are some things that we can watch out for as we're trying to identify it in ourselves and maybe even the people around us?
Okay, thanks, Rumbi. So anxiety is a sense of being ill at ease that people often feel. It can feel in the body like too much energy, like an hyperactivity, palpitations with the heart going really fast, sweatiness, mind racing. Some people get panic attacks, so feeling like they can't breathe, chest pain, and just a feeling of not being able to relax, not feeling comfortable or at ease in any one situation, poor sleep as well, reduced appetite. And what all of these are manifestations of increased adrenaline in the system and also a hormone called cortisol. Now, adrenaline is a hormone and a neurotransmitter that is necessary in our bodies and has been historically necessary as well. So when we were living in the savannah and a lion was chasing us, you needed your adrenaline to come on immediately so you could run away from the lion, get up a tree, and that's the end of that, you know. So adrenaline hypes up the system, makes your heart beat faster, puts your blood pressure up, makes you hypervigilant, your eyes open wider, your pupils dilate so that you can take in more information. It makes you more vigilant and to try to survive. Now, the problem is that in this day and age, the lions are not chasing us anymore because the outcome of the lion was twofold. Either the lion caught you and you died and it was over, or you got up the tree and it was over. And if you see an antelope being chased by a lion, for example, on a nature documentary, if they get away, they shake. Have you noticed? They shake. They shake. And that is releasing the trauma of that near-death experience. Now, for us, we don't have lions chasing us anymore, but we have deadlines, we have bosses, we have parents, we have teachers. And so this adrenaline cortisol system is activated all the time. It was only meant to be activated for a short time to get away from the lion. And now it's constant. And this is where we see the long-term results of having the system activated all the time, ending up in stress, in high blood pressure. And enough of that for a long time then ends up in people having an increased risk of heart disease and stroke. So this is called an increased activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight and survival part of our nervous system. And so that's how anxiety shows up. And that's the physiological reason why we feel the way we do.
Yeah, and I find that explanation super helpful because someone watching this might be thinking, well, how is being anxious different from being worried or from being nervous? And because when you think of being nervous, think of like a speech that you're about to give and you're about to go in front of all these people. And the more appropriate response is that, yeah, but when you're preparing, you'll feel nervous for a few minutes, but after you deliver the speech, you might actually get an endorphin rush afterwards, and then you move on with your day. And that's the more normal reaction. That's our equivalent of the antelope scenario, right? Yeah. The lion that's chasing you is, will the audience receive what I'm doing well? But then you literally let it go afterwards. Mm-hmm. But then the anxiety is more harmful because you're actually changing, like you're having a real body response and one that is sustained. So I think that's a key difference. Like the fact that there's like this continual triggering and you actually feel it in your body as a negative experience, as you're saying, the shakes, the insomnia and everything else. So it's happening mentally and physically.
Exactly. And the mental and the physical feedback, because we are a whole human. So I like to think of it more as a body-mind complex, so that the mind is actually in the body. So even if you, I don't know, pretended or, dissociated enough to say, well, my mind, I'm okay. You see people say that, I'm okay, right? But because the heart is beating fast, because there is more adrenaline, that's still feeding back to the brain. So even if you are consciously trying to block out your anxiety, there will be a message that is being received by the mind coming from the body saying that we are in a hyperactivated state. So, right. So it's a cycle, and this, what's so beautiful about it is, we'll get onto it later, is that then it gives us many places with which to make our interventions as well, so that we don't just have to only go to therapy and talk about the anxiety. We can do other practices that incorporate our body as part of this body-mind complex to help us to heal.
Got it. So is there such a thing as good anxiety? Because I think one of the issues that some people face is that when they experience anxiety, it might make them better performers. So the fact that you get nervous makes you think, okay, maybe I should prepare a little bit harder, study more. And so you might have like this weird relationship between anxiety triggering ultra performance and then maybe thinking it's a good thing. So is there a good side to it, or is it just a bad thing?
So I do not like to label anything as good or bad, because I think that's actually part of our whole problem as human beings, is that we tend to push away what we think is bad, instead of finding that actually there is good within the bad and there's bad within the good. And actually life is a journey or a dance of figuring out what is what. So, so yes, you're saying, you've just explained that anxiety can be beneficial for some people because it drives them, it pushes them, it motivates them. And if it is for a short amount of time, like the lion, yeah, why not? If that's something, if it's a tool that you can consciously turn off and turn on, but you, as in the higher you, is the one that's choosing to do that, absolutely. But right. If it's something that is driving you, so you are now at the mercy of this automatic behavior, then I think it is not a consciously applied tool. And then that's when you run the risk of being in a sustained pattern with it, and also becoming addicted to it, you see. So this is the other thing with all kinds of neurotransmitters and sensations in the body, is that some people who grow up, for example, in very difficult home environments, where their sympathetic nervous system is activated all the time because you just don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Even when they find themselves in a peaceful environment, they've moved out of home, whatever, this is where we see people making life choices, such as me, where you make choices that bring more of that stress into your life again, because it is familiar, it's safe. It's like, well, at least I'm alive. Like, I feel rubbish, but at least I'm alive, So so we need to be really conscious about, okay, am I consciously choosing to activate my sympathetic nervous system? Like when I go to the gym, that is choosing to get your sympathetic nervous system up, but it's a choice and it's for a short moment, and it's intentional. But if I'm creating havoc in my life so that I have the sensation of the neurotransmitters that I was familiar with growing up, then that's a totally different story.
Yeah, I think there'll be someone listening to this who might realize that there might be some behaviors that are, that are self-triggering, self-harming, right? To your point that if I'm used to feeling insecure about something, I'm going to create those and those situations. And again, it's not because you consciously want to feel bad about yourself or you consciously want to be anxious. But yeah, maybe because it's what you're used to, you're replicating patterns. So, think again before maybe you send a message to someone that might actually cause a fight, or another issue that I know of is that some people don't actually study on time when they're meant to study. So you've got a whole 2 months to prepare.
Yes.
And you could take the easy road, which is gradual prep. And for whatever reason, maybe because you're used to disappointment, I'll just use a blanket term. You create a scenario where you don't prepare. Now the exam is a week away. And now you're creating this adrenalized reality where you're unprepared. When you're studying, you can't focus because you're thinking of all the stuff you don't know. And then you can't even think clearly when it's exam time because you haven't gone through a gradual training process. Because again, you have to ask yourself, what would have stopped the person from just taking the right amount of time to prepare? I'm oversimplifying, but these are some of the things that people do to put themselves in scenarios where they feel anxious. And then having real world decisions like suboptimal grades happen when it could have been managed.
And what you're describing is called self-sabotage, and the cure for this is just to have so much compassion for yourself, to firstly know who you are. If you have ever had an inkling of what you were like before conditioning, before society, before parenting made its imprint on you, and if you can't remember, go look at a baby. Go look at a baby and see its wide open eyes, the light, the openness, the awe. And remember that that's what you were born with. That's who you were born as before life started to imprint itself on you. And this is like the joke of life. To say joke, it can sound like I'm making things light, but actually we have to also have the lightness about the heavy things in order for us to feel like we're able to shift them. Otherwise we get stuck and we begin to wallow. So to say, I was born like this. I was born shining and perfect and just so full of potential and love and everything. And these things happened to hide that from myself. But it's still there. And now the journey is one of removing those layers, to see them, to feel them, to acknowledge them, to thank them for what they have taught you, and then to set them aside until you return to that place. And that is an amazing journey in and of itself. So when we have things like anxiety, when we do things like self-sabotaging, instead of beating ourselves up and thinking, I'm such a terrible person, and just to have the self-compassion to say, I know I'm somewhere in there, and let me just find out what's going on. Because if you beat yourself up, you are actually just self-perpetuating the exact same trauma that caused you to be like this in the first place. So again, it's a recreation of that neurotransmitter cascade.
And actually, the self-sabotage is worse because when you're the one doing it to yourself, you can't escape yourself. There might have been like an original stimulus, which is like a very critical parent or a very critical teacher, but you leave that person, right? As in, you're not around them all the time. But once you start doing it to yourself, this loop especially the loop that you described in the sense that it actually changes how your body functions. You get into a very tricky space. But I'm one of those people who believes that sometimes feelings are just feelings. You don't have to attach a label to everything, but it is also good to have a language to express what one is feeling. And we've used some terms now. We've said anxiety, we've talked about self-sabotage. Are there actually different types of anxiety? Like, is there like performance anxiety or something like that? Or is it just one?
Yeah, no, there's performance anxiety, as you mentioned. There's social anxiety, which people feel when they're in certain situations. There's generalized anxiety, which is just feeling anxious all the time. There's fear of flying. Anything that gives you this activated sympathetic nervous system can be classified as anxiety. And for certain people, it will be situational. And for other people, it will be generalized. Situational anxiety can be crippling in that, you know, if you want to go on holiday and you have fear of flying, then, you know, that's a barrier between you and going. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, that can be, you know, you can work on that with a therapist. You can do CBT. You could even, you know, ask your doctor for a tablet to take on the way there and on the way back, you know, but it's not going to cripple your life in the way that generalized anxiety can, or where some people, I'm sure you've heard of agoraphobia, like they can't even leave the house, you know, because they're afraid of being outside. And so once we see anxiety impinging on one's day-to-day life and what one is capable of doing, the joy with which they can experience the world, that's when it's, you know, a more, I don't like the term, but like a more pathological state, which needs to be addressed.
You mentioned the term, the CBT. What is that?
Oh, so CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is something, it's a kind of therapy where people are taught how to look at their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and how they translate into action. And so they sit with a therapist, and let's say if you're agoraphobic and you're like, I'm scared of going outside because I'm worried that I will be run over by a car. So I just don't want to go outside. Then the therapist will help you to look at the thoughts, which is, I don't want to go outside because I'm scared of being run over by a car. The feeling, it makes me anxious and scared and worried. The behavior, I stay in at home. And then what the actions, so, you know, what you then are avoiding or what you are not managing to do. So in this case, then the therapist helps you to find a point in that cycle where you can interrupt the cycle. So it might be something like, I will get my friend to come with me because then I feel a little bit safer when my friend is walking with me. And then maybe that can gradually help you to get outside. So that's a fantastic technique. But I feel that CBT doesn't go far enough. And this is what's offered on the NHS, for example, on the public health system here. Because it helps people to just, you know, it's like, oh, I'm worried about this, I'm anxious about this. And then you just kind of robotically do what you have planned with your therapist. It works because it gets you productive. For some people, it helps a little bit further than that because it gives you evidence that your fear is unfounded. But for a lot of people, I see that it actually doesn't get to the root of why you're having the thought in the first place.
Yeah.
So if we're with another kind of therapist who had more time and a different kind of training, they might say, so why are you even scared of getting run over in the first place?
Yes.
And it might turn out, you know, that there's this long story, you know, that happened when you were like 6 years old and, you know, maybe you saw someone being run over or something like that. And that really imprinted.
And that PTSD is what you must address, not the anxiety of going out now, right?
Exactly.
So this whole root cause effect is so important. You know, sometimes even and this I was saying that there's some feelings that you just feel, then there's times where you actually need to say, what is the language that I need to actually be able to articulate what I'm feeling? And if nothing else, just being self-aware, right? Because I think that we have a lot of memories that we suppress. And even because to your point that there's some people who need to be pushed and pushed for them to realize that there's a memory from when they were 6. Whereas where you'd ideally be, even if you don't know how to fix it, ideally you'd already know, look, I have this issue. When I was 10, I almost drowned. And ever since then, I don't like water. Because at least then you're building from a base of how do I get over my fear now? But you've been able to actually know where the root cause lies, right?
Exactly. And for some people, the traumatic experience, to find language for it can be very re-traumatizing in therapeutic situations as well. And so there are other techniques, because the memories don't only lie in the mind, but also in the body. So sometimes you don't even have to go there, you know, in terms of a memory, or sometimes you don't even remember. You know, I currently see a body worker. So this is like a form of body therapy where it's like massage, but he really like massages very hard the pain in my body. So, and where the pain is where the patterns of holding myself to feel safe have kind of imprinted in my frame. So like right now we're working on my right shoulder, because it tends to just curl in ever so slightly, because that just makes me feel, you know, like, you know, I've got myself. But in order to show up in the world as a confident person who is open and ready for life to, you know, bless her and to experience everything, I need to have a frame energetically that's like this. So he works on my shoulder. It's painful. Like I start speaking in Shona. I start calling up. And he says to me, oh, when you speak in Shona, then I know that
it's working.
So I can't remember the exact memory. And some of the patterns are, you know, more were more repeated things, you know, like maybe feeling like I was more acceptable, or people wouldn't hurt me, or I wasn't standing out so much if I made myself this, you know. So it's like a protective thing. So it's not even like a big trauma with a capital T. And so I can't remember each specific instance in which my body did this more and more, but my body remembers. And then through doing this work, and also through things like dancing, just self-awareness, meditation, postural awareness, walking in the street, when I walk like this, it's therapy for me, because I want to go like this, and I'm like this, I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And nothing happens, and that's therapeutic in itself. So if it's too traumatizing or too difficult to find the memories within the mind and to find language for them, then we always have the medium of the body to help us to do that as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to encourage our GenZimmers to do, an awareness of your holistic self, right? And sometimes when you're talking to another individual, you might not express these things fully, but if you're journaling, you're able to say, okay, you know what? Some of these trends that might not be perceptible to others, no one else is going to be aware of whether or not you had a good night's sleep. But if you're in your journal saying, oh, you know what? I still can't sleep. I've been worried about X, Y, Z. I've been tossing and turning. And just having that daily habit where with time, when you need to reflect on it, you can say that, hey, for 2 weeks straight, all I said was, I'm not sleeping. It gives context to a long-standing issue, right? Because when you're going through it, I think that from what you're describing, when you're in the thick of anxiety, you're just trying to cope.
Yeah.
Right. So you're not necessarily noticing that some of these issues are like snowflakes compounding into a massive snowball that can actually start to cause real problems in life. Which then makes me wonder, how does someone go about validating whether or not they actually have anxiety? Should they just go according to the description that you gave before in terms of what they might be feeling in their bodies? Or is there something that they can like a list, so to speak, that they can refer to figure out if this applies to them?
Okay, so from a Western medical point of view, you could fill in a form such as the GAD, which is the Generalized Anxiety and Depression tool, and you'll come out with a score. But because of the questions, you'll be able to feel whether or not you have what Western medicine would classify as anxiety. I like to go one step further and to say that we need to have a radical knowledge and belief that we deserve to be at peace and to feel good, And so anything that is outside of that sense of peace, I think peace is a really good marker for a baseline. Anything that's outside of that is information. So it might not be like really bad or really strong, but just to write down in your journal, today I just feel a little bit off. It's good information for you to start to then try and understand, okay, so what is it about today that's been different? What has arisen in me? So having a daily practice, something like journaling, but also some quiet time to meditate where you're not necessarily thinking, but allowing yourself to speak from a subconscious point of view. And you can really come up with some stuff that you had no idea was the cause. It could be something that you ate, for example. It could be a situation, somebody who, it could have been the bus driver who reminded you of your grade 7 teacher who, so any situation and any feeling is information. It's a mirror for us to then find out and to learn more about ourselves, and then to increase our capacity to care for ourselves.
Yeah, but can we just double click on that point about food? Because I think when you're young, you think you can just do whatever you want. You can eat all the junk food, you can drink all of the juices, all of the fizzy stuff, and have it not impact your mood or your health, which is so not true, right? We have to always be conscious eaters and care about how much sleep we're getting, and care about how much water we're drinking, and care about the quality of our food. Is there a relationship between food and anxiety, or other lifestyle issues and anxiety as well?
Yeah, we have to care about ourselves, right? And all of these things are caring about ourselves. And sometimes if we haven't felt cared for, it's very difficult to know what caring for ourselves is. And that's part of the journey, is learning that caring for myself is eating, is exercising, is eating well, is exercising, resting, is sleeping, is connecting with other people, is connecting with myself, is having boundaries. And so it's a journey of learning what love truly is, because we can think that love is having your school fees paid for you. It doesn't matter if you're picked up on time, just being picked up at all is
yeah.
I sometimes people find it very difficult to criticize their caregivers because they think that means that they are not acknowledging the love that they received. But actually, without just being truthful about your own experience, it's not saying that people are wrong. It's not saying that you don't love them or you dislike them, you want to abandon and disown them. No, it's saying these were the things that happened that did not nourish me in the way that a child deserves to be. I understand why that is. It's because those caregivers never received that themselves, and their caregivers before them. And so it's a blameless crime, because how far back in history are you going to go in order to say it was your fault? So there's no person at fault here, actually. And having the compassion to be able to see that, you did your best. You did your best with what you had. And it got me this far. But now I need to learn for myself what love is. over and above what you were able to give me. And then that's how generational healing helps. So I know I've gone on a bit of a tangent, but because you were mentioning about how to care for yourself, I think that, you know, learning how to care for yourself is learning a type of love that many of us did not quite receive, because our parents didn't know how to give it, because they didn't receive it. So yes, so food does impact anxiety because, you know, so our cells, you know, have consciousness themselves, you know. So if I bump my toe, for example, I'm going to know it because that toe cell is going to send a neurotransmitter pain message to my brain, and I'm going to limp around. So that shows us that every single cell in our body contributes to the general feeling of wellness within. And if cells are feeling unwell, they will send messages through neurotransmitters and hormones and peptides to the brain to say we are not well, in the hopes that we will respond to this imbalance in our homeostasis, so in our internal physiology, and say, oh, I need to respond to this. But because we are so used to being uncomfortable, and like we said before, sometimes we even want to subconsciously create our own discomfort because it's familiar, we often ignore these signals. And the more we ignore them, the more the system adjusts to say, okay, this is the new normal. This is our homeostasis. And that's why we begin to tolerate lower and lower states of health. And that's why when we do wake up and realize that, oh, actually, you know, for example, in Chinese medicine, your liver is directly related to how much money and financial abundance you have, because the liver is the governor of the qi, of how the energy flows within the body. So the Western medics would look and be like, what are you talking about? That's never been, that's, but give it 2,000 years and some person is going to stand up on a lectern and open the journal and be like, we have just realized the correlation. We have just discovered, it's always discovered. We have just discovered the correlation with financial abundance or whatever. So can we begin to trust ourselves to know what is good for us without needing to be told, do this because it's good, but just to do it because it's good. So, I mean, taking care of your liver, whether this is true or not, just take care of your liver,
just do
right?
it. Whether or not your parents tell you to, right? Because we have a lot of information about what is healthy, right? So lead it for yourself. Okay, so I hear you on, you know, the broader issue. For me personally, I'm quite passionate about the role of food and especially the role of sleep. Why? I think that one of the hardest adjustments when people leave home and go to university, and then from university into working, is that they're so used to things like sleep and food being dictated to them, that if they don't decide for themselves healthy habits around it, it's easy to slide. You know, when I was in boarding school, you were told strictly lights out at 9 and the bell would ring at like, I think 5 o'clock in the morning. So the control around adequate sleep, you never had to think about it. You got it by default. But now when you leave home, you're having to decide that sleep is important and you're not realizing how important it was. For you to be on, you know, first team hockey, national hockey, all these things and being a top academic, it was actually because you were well rested, and some of these baseline things that you take for granted were already working in your favor. You were then worrying about other stuff. So like, again, it's a passion of mine for young people to just be mindful of the role of diet and sleep as a baseline. It's such an important baseline to defend, especially in university. Anyone who's struggling with burning out academically knows this. And it's not just about the workload of university life, it's also the lifestyle elements. But the other big thing that the youngsters now have to deal with that wasn't really a thing for us is the role of like digital media, devices, social media. So, what have you seen either in your work as a doctor or just socially in terms of how these other elements are now affecting anxiety levels in young people?
Okay. So what I've seen is that firstly, they are very addictive, right? So people get a lot of like a dopamine activation from being on Instagram and just getting these it's just like candy. It's literally the same as eating sweets, but with your brain, like direct mainline. And the problem with this is that it means that you spend so much time doing that sometimes you neglect what you're supposed to be doing. So the definition of an addiction is a compulsive action that stops you from doing what you are supposed to be doing, or that is detrimental to your health or to the people around you. And so number one, just the addiction in itself, the dopamine in itself, when it wears off, then you feel like you need more. And so you go back to the easiest way of getting it. But actually, dopamine is a very special chemical in that it is highly motivating because it is a chemical of reward. So right. Ancestry, if we go back to our ancestry, it always helps us to understand what's happening inside our bodies.
Right.
So ancestry, we used to go hunting, and you would have to walk for 3 days, like in the beating hot sun, starving, because that's why you've come out hunting, because the rest of the village needs to eat. And then suddenly you see an antelope, you kill it, and the joy, the reward, the feeling of happiness is dopamine. And so you have exerted yourself, and then you get a reward. And then you eat it, and again, that feeling of joy, reward, satisfaction, the high that you would get is dopamine. But that's because of exertion. Now we're getting the same dopamine just by going like this.
Like,
so
someone's like all these different things.
Exactly. And so, and this is where I like to say that, and we've spoken about this before, Rumbi, that one of our greatest currencies at the moment is our attention, because by leaking our dopamine like this, it removes a great motivator within our physiology that we would usually use to do something difficult that we will see the products of. So the thing is, we're firstly addicted, we're looking for more, and that looking for more is a little bit of pain and can be anxiety inducing, but also knowing that we're neglecting, I can feel it already in my belly, like when I've just been doing Instagram a little bit too much and maybe I should have done something else. I feel this feeling down in my belly, like I should be somewhere else. I should be doing something else. And that's a feeling of anxiety. Like it's almost like a FOMO, right? Like I'm wasting my life. I'm wasting my time here. And we could ignore that and just keep going and maybe add in something else to keep that feeling of anxiety at bay. Or, and this is a good version of anxiety. This is information. It's saying, okay, this is not serving you anymore. You need to be moving on and doing something that harnesses the power of this dopamine for your benefit and for the benefit of the community around you. And so I think this is where
that's where a term like marginal utility comes in. So I'm an economist / banker or whatever, right? So it's like, because again, we want this to be practical for our young viewers, right? So we're not saying that the social media is bad, but maybe in your first 10 minutes of browsing, it's great. You've read the GenZim page, you followed the celebrity, you've liked the music, and it's cool. Like you've picked up some useful information, like in the first 10 minutes. Then now you're seeing all the videos of these seemingly perfect people and these perfect role models out there. And now you start to feel bad. And after an hour of reading and looking at pages that make you feel bad, you're in a negative space, right?
Oh, yeah.
So social media is good, but there's a point where you can actually start to feel that in the beginning, you're enjoying it, but then now it's triggering some negative feelings in you. And that's when you realize, okay, I've crossed that threshold and I'm now like on the dark side of this experience.
Exactly. And the other side of this is, when you're looking at, the people having their perfect lives, even though, if they took more photos of the other stuff, it wouldn't be so perfect. What I've learned is that often what we admire is what we aspire to ourselves, and we know that we're capable of. So that feeling of anxiety is also coming from a sense of like, that could be me. Why isn't that me? But if you're just sitting there scrolling instead of creating, then that won't be you. And so we really have to shift our mindsets from being consumers to being creators as well. And it doesn't matter whether you're a digital creator or whatever kind of creator, to use the creative life force that you were born with, that you need to expend and express before you die, is part of your life purpose here on the planet. And if you get caught in this dopaminergic cycle of consumption, then that feeling of anxiety will always be there, because you know that you've got something more to give, something to share, and yet you're not doing it. And the question again is why? Who's hiding,
And who's stopping you? There's a quote I like to put in a lot of my socials, which is from Aeneas Nin, and it's the one which goes, and the day came when the risk it took to bloom was more painful than the risk it took to remain in the bud. But the word pain it represents anxiety, right? Because when you know you could be more, and it feels accessible, if you would take a certain number of steps, that can actually be an important sign that, hey, you're at the point where you've got trapped potential and you need to do something about it.
Absolutely. And I love that you bring up that word pain, because we often run away from it, but we don't know how to harness the power of pain. Often get lost in the drudgery of it. And what I've begun to explore quite recently is this concept of hormetic stress, which is putting yourself in painful situations consciously in order to teach your system that pain is okay and pain is good. So this shoulder thing that I was talking about, that is hormetic stress. It's so painful. Going to the gym, working out is painful, but it teaches your body that, I've got this. The sympathetic activation, it happens, your heart rate goes up, you get the adrenaline, and your body actually becomes normalized to it, but in a healthy way. So that when you do have a stressful situation, it doesn't then, fly up immediately. You've already got a little bit, it's called sympathetic tone. You've got a parasympathetic tone, which is the rest and relax side of your nervous system. You know how to activate that to help to counteract the effects of the adrenaline and stuff. And my current favorite, or two favorites, are fasting and cold water immersion. So getting into an ice bath a few times a week for 3 minutes is painful. Like it's the lion. It is actually the lion.
There are many people who know exactly how that feels. I don't know if you remember boarding school. If you waited more than 30 minutes to shower in the morning, the hot water was gone. It was just cold water straight, right? So
how did
but then you're making it sound all nice and bougie, right? Hormetic stress. Well, you're gonna help someone have a positive spin on cold showers now, because then they can say, you know what? It is what it is. The hot water is finished. Let me at least use this to like kickstart my day.
Exactly.
And have a positive association with something that is now just beyond their control.
We need stuff to be bougie to start to believe it. It's like it has to be bougie and come from a doctor for it to be valid. Whereas if you went to high school in Zim and you had to bath with cold showers every day, like that's not acceptable. So this another part of deconditioning is we really have to question ourselves on like why we choose to listen to information when it comes packaged in certain ways. And if we don't take on information unless it's packaged in certain ways, how do we limit ourselves in thinking, well, I am not worthy of being listened to because I am not packaged in the way that people want me to be? So by giving others the freedom to have validity in our experience, we give ourselves validity as well. That's just a side note.
It's an important one, right? Because one could say that, look at how kale got this amazing rebranding. Kale is now healthy and you pay a premium to eat organic kale. But when it was Muyo, it didn't sound as good, right? So it's important to really take advantage of that. And I would love, your earlier video was about your journey as a doctor. And I've been encouraging some of the mid students who follow my channel to say, hey, you might actually have some very interesting body of work around traditional foods as a way of healing, right? So, we've just come out of the pandemic where a lot of people were drinking a lot more moringa tea, a lot more zumbani, all this stuff, things that were already being taken as natural supplements, but it took a stress event for people to realize, hey, I don't want to be buying the typical immune boosters or whatever, or what's natural. And lo and behold, we already had a lot of answers. We just weren't leaning into them. So you don't want to get to that. And I think that now, leads me to an important question for the young people who are now saying, okay, I've understood this thing. I know how it feels. But now the issue is, how do I deal with it? And is it something that I can actually expect to recover from? Or am I consigned to saying that I'm going to manage my anxiety?
Okay. So firstly, you need to befriend it. So not to see it as something bad that you need to cure or recover from, but actually to develop a relationship with it and say, so like, who are you? What part of me is this? And what are you trying to tell me? Because there is nothing bad within my system. You must be trying to give me some kind of information. I'm here and I want to listen. Who are you and how can you be transformed? And that anxious part might say to you, I am the part of you that doesn't feel safe because it never felt worthy, and it never felt that it could get out of a difficult situation that I was in my childhood. And so I'm always worried that I'm going to be stuck in these kinds of painful situations. And then you get to that anxious part. Okay, well, thank you for having been there in my childhood, because like all those times, like when I was watching TV and I knew that if somebody walked in and saw me watching TV, I was going to get whipped with muabros, shamu.
Yeah.
So that part, the one that knew that it could just press the off button on the remote and pretend it was reading, that protected you. So you can thank them. You can really thank it. But then you can say to it, you don't have to do that work anymore. Okay. If you're still in the situation, then I'll give you some other guidance. But if you're not in the situation anymore, then you can say, thank you for having helped me to survive until this point, but you don't need to carry that burden anymore. What else would you do? And that part might say to you, well, I've always been interested in dancing, or I've always wanted to play chess or whatever. And then you allow that part to express itself without judgment, in all of its pain and all of its joy, in another way. And you might find that you end up being an incredibly talented chess player because you can see 5 steps ahead, because back then with the remote control, you had to see 5 steps ahead, So it's transferring the skills of that anxious part to something that is joyful and that is beneficial to you. But it first starts with befriending the part and understanding it.
Yeah, and I think for young people, because some of them might not actually control the home environment, like you said. So you might still be living at home with a parent who's triggering. But if you can do the work to at least identify the root issue, to say, oh, you know what, every time my dad gives me a hard time around my grades or my stuff that I'm doing around the house, it makes me anxious. Because the other dark side of this, which I'm going to cover in a separate series, is around how some of these triggers that start in the home are causing the addictions to things like alcohol, to things like drugs. But then before you can actually effectively deal with weaning yourself off, you have to understand what are the stimuli that really take you to this dark place, because that's what you need to address. Yes, because addiction also is very, like, it has there's an actual physiological issue as well, in the sense of you've become acclimatized to using a certain substance, but its root cause was psychological. And so if you can actually say that before everything else, this is where I'm at, it's an important part of the work that in these formative years, you can actually take control of.
Absolutely. And, you know, it has a physical manifestation coming from a psychological root. But actually, what I have found is that working on the psychological and the spiritual, because the spiritual side is saying, this is not who I am. Yes. I know who I am. So just having that freedom of mind to say, this is not who I am, and so I can change. This is not who I am, so I'm going to go back to who I was born as. And then the psychological is I'm not acting as who I am because of these triggers or these underlying causes. Then actually by working on those, that really creates the conditions for the freedom to happen on the physical point, the physical manifestation, which is actually, interestingly, the easiest to do once you have addressed those things. But you can't do it the other.
Yes, because the psychological fix is what sustains the physical recovery. You will not crave those addictions or those substances that you've been addicted to if you've been able to identify how you're going to react to those triggers. Exactly. I'm nodding my head vigorously because right now on our page, we're talking about a series called Finding Me. And when my social media manager raised it the first time, I was like, well, if you're 19, 20, are you really finding yourself? Or are you doing this work that we're talking about now, which is to say, in your spirit, you know that you're a happy person, you know that you are joyful, but you've had to survive certain things. And you're now finding a way back to restoring. So I think the younger you are, it's not so much about finding yourself, but it is restoring a certain amount of creativity and letting that lead you to experiences, and then finding joy in that discovery.
Exactly. This is
okay. So I hear you, and I'm actually a big fan of this point that you're raising of saying, let's start with the root cause and really work on our psychological foundation. But then there's some people who've done that work and they're still anxious and they're living with it. So how do we help them to not be inhibited by the anxiety that they do feel?
Okay. So by befriending the anxiety, it no longer is a huge monster that you are subject to. It actually becomes a pal or an information giver that you walk with. So when you are triggered, it's no longer this overwhelming flood of adrenaline and cortisol that floods your body entirely. It's more like a little pat on the shoulder, whatever, and you're like, oh, hello. Who are you? What's going on? What can I do here to help shift this situation so that you feel more comfortable? Because we don't need to eliminate our sensations. These emotions are information. It's energy in motion. There's nothing good and bad or bad. It's only bad when it's overwhelming. It changes your behavior. It inhibits you from doing what you need to. But everything else, like a little flutter of something, is good information. It's telling you something that you need to be aware of. So once you have reached this point, then you are able to use it. Like, so then if you're anxious in the presence of someone or something, then you can examine yourself. Is this really truly a dangerous situation? Am I reacting? And if it is, then get out. Because you need to be anxious, in a dangerous situation so that you can make the moves. Is this something about the person that I need to question about myself, maybe a preconception, like how people will say, like black men in hoodies walking on the street makes them anxious. And that's actually a prejudgment and a preconception. So is this something about me and how I am responding to the stimulus?
That's a big one.
Means that I have a precondition that I need to heal or to change? Or is this person reminding me of someone or some situation that caused me anxiety in the past? And can I show, again, compassion and acknowledgement to myself? So then you begin to have a conversation internally with yourself to figure out what is truly going on, instead of just reacting to the flood of emotions that happens. And the other thing that you can do is, if you do find that it's not just, that you're in clarity and you're in alignment, and this anxiety that you're feeling is a good indicator that you need to be somewhere else, and is one of the second two, then you can do, there's, techniques such as, you can look these up on YouTube, emotional freedom technique, which is tapping and giving affirmations to yourself, and it helps to reset the nervous system. There's also something called polyvagal technique, which specifically works with this sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and is called befriending the nervous system. So if you look up any of these keywords on YouTube, you will find a lot of practices that can be done daily to help to reset the nervous system. And then when you are triggered, you can help yourself reprogram into a nervous system and a physiology that registers safety. So it's a journey. It's a daily journey.
Yeah, because what you're explaining earlier is that there's a whole physiological engine running. Something has to happen to disrupt that flow, right? So I don't suffer from anxiety myself, but then when I'm nervous, I will do certain things like, so I'll think about what about this whole experience is making me nervous, and can I use it in a positive way? Is it going to help me prepare better? Maybe it's made me realize, oh, I'm nervous because I'm afraid I might get this question and I don't have an answer. So then I'll prepare better, right? Then the other times I'm just like, look, I'm overthinking it. Just go outside, stand in the sun, breathe. And like, I literally have days where I just say, I'm going to go into my garden in the sun and then just breathe. Sometimes I lie down on the grass, or I take my shoes off and I walk on the grass. I don't know why, but grass just does that to me. Or I'll listen to a song or two, right? And then take it from there.
Yeah, so what you're describing is called grounding, and nature is the #1 place to go to learn how to be in your body and how to feel peaceful in your body. And the reason you feel that way around grass, and around, people feel it around water bodies as well, is because there are negative ions in the environment that can then flow into your body, because this is all an electromagnetic experience that we're having, so ions and electrons are flowing into you, they're flowing into, everything that you touch as well. So these electrochemical circuits that are happening when you're receiving information or magnetism or electricity from the earth, it's a very supportive experience, because everything that we have, everything that is happening here is a product of the earth. And if you want to get very spiritual about it, she is our mother. So, it kind of takes you back to the experience of being a very small baby, completely dependent on your mother, on your parents, before the conditioning started. Let's say in the first 2, when everybody just cuddled you, catered to your every need. This is what the earth does for us. So by connecting with that, it connects us with that place of complete safety and acceptance that we felt as babies. So going out in nature can be extremely healing, and help us to to see that actually everything that I have, everything that I need is provided for. So it gives us that sense of trust that which goes beyond, I need a new iPhone. I need, it addresses the basic human needs of shelter, food, love, connection. And there is something deep within us that knows that that is all we need. And so to connect with that source of abundance and sustenance can help us to then carry ourselves with more fortitude and more belief in that good things are for me. And so what should I be anxious about? If I'm anxious about what other people think about me, then maybe I should just stop judging other people so much, and then I won't feel so judged. That one was for me. That was a big one. Like as soon as I felt so self-conscious, like, oh, what's everyone going to think of me? Am I going to say the right thing? And it's like, oh, as soon as I just allowed myself to not be hypercritical of other people, not needing them to be perfect, not like marking them all the time, then I was like, oh, nobody's doing that to me either. So sometimes the things that we're worried about are the things that we are perpetuating that we need to heal, and then it heals ourselves. And we made that point before.
No, it makes sense, because anxiety is up here, right? It might manifest in the body, but it starts up here. So we've spent a great chunk of time talking about this because it's clearly something close to your heart. And I'm aware that you're either about to launch or have launched a project helping young people to deal with anxiety. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that will be a great takeaway for some of the young people who are wanting to have an ongoing conversation around dealing with this issue.
So I am launching a community project called Future Africa Community. And it's a space where we will talk about all of this stuff. And really what it is it's about finding psychological, spiritual, and physical freedom, and understanding how these interweave to help us to realize that we are the reality creators for ourselves and for our community. So if there is anything that we think is unjust or unfair or that we would like to change, it's a place for us to recognize our internal power to make that happen, and to acknowledge the blockages that we might have and the things that we need to learn about ourselves and heal before that comes to fruition or to manifestation. So yeah, it's a group where we'll be talking about all of this kind of stuff, encouraging one another, and yeah, being there, holding space for each other's pain, each other's trauma, and reminding one another that we are not just that. We are far more than that. And those things can be the tools and the gold and our unique gift if we know how to transform them. And that's what we'll be doing. So we'll start off by, it's just a newsletter at the moment.
Okay.
And gain momentum, then and we're also on Instagram, Future Africa with a K community, because we're decolonizing. And
of course.
You can email us at inspired@futureafrica.com. And what was the last thing I was going to say? Oh, and then as we gain momentum, then we will open up a community space where we can meet in real time on Zoom, and also through messaging, share resources and stuff.
Is it for teenagers? Is it for Gen Zs? Or is it more fluid?
Well, for anyone from 16 to 25, I would say. I mean, that's quite broad. So there'll be spaces within, when we do launch the online space, there'll be spaces within that will be separate for the teens and for the Gen Zers. But for the moment, the newsletter is for everyone. And please feel free to email and say also what you would like to be addressed in the newsletter, because it's a conversation, is what it is.
Now, look, it's been great talking to you, and I hope that those who want to do work connected to healing. You know, let's not just treat symptoms, let's actually heal mind and bodies so that it does not result in more severe physical issues. Of course, not everything can be healed that way, but a big part of it can. So I'm hoping that it does inspire a more localized way of treating. And you mentioned the example of like Chinese medicine. They have a holistic approach. And as Africans, we have a rich tradition of holistic medicine. We just need to find a way in which we can incorporate that into methodology that people understand and can confidently propagate. Because right now it happens in pockets. And I think your career approach really demonstrates that. And then, you know, this focus around dealing and healing with anxiety in young people gets to the issue in the early days before it potentially manifests into bigger problems down the line. So I really hope that the young people watching this reach out to you, either on your socials or through email or the newsletter that you're starting, and that we really just put a lot of weight around this, because we'll all be better for it. And the more we start talking about this as well, we'll realize it's nothing to be embarrassed about, right? Anything that gets put in the light removes any sort of embarrassment or shame. So we're normalizing it. We're just saying, hey, it's something that you might be going through, but it's addressable, right? And let's have the conversation that make that possible. So thanks so much for your time. I hope, again, you never know what these things can inspire. So I hope that it does help whoever's watching, and I'm looking forward to having you again in the future.
Thank you, Rumbi, and thanks, GenZim. See you soon.
Cheers.